So back on January 17 of 2022, I released a video showing you guys all of my bait finesse reels. I think the total number of reels was like somewhere in the mid 30s. Now since then, I've acquired another 17 BFS reels. Most I bought with my own money, and some were sent to me by manufacturers and vendors. Now as far as I can tell, all of these reels are still for sale today. So in this video, I'm going to give you guys a BFS reel buyer's guide and give you my opinions based on my experience with all 17 reels to help you make a better choice when purchasing. Now, quick disclaimer, I realize there are a few popular BFS reels missing from this video, like all the Black Knight 2 variants, but I don't plan on getting any of them since I already own the Black Knight 2 and Dark Wolf Ultra, and the CDM market is already moving on to the next generation of reels. Now these are going to be quick overviews, and if you want to see more detailed reviews on each reel, go to my Bait Finesse playlist as they are all there. I'm also going to be leaving links pinned at the top of the comments that will take you to where you can buy some of these reels to support the companies and vendors that supported my channel by sending them to me. So let's begin. So the first reel is a reel I bought off of AliExpress for literally $20. It's a reel I call the ATD 200, and I bought this because it was a copy of one of my favorite Shimano reels, the CAENAN, and it had a shallow BFS looking spool. Now speaking of the spool, it weighs in at a whopping 14.4 grams, and I'm pretty sure it's at least 34 millimeters in diameter if I recall. Now since it was a $20 reel from AliExpress, I really didn't have much hope for it to be fishable, much less being able to bait finesse. But the ATD 200 proved me dead wrong, as it actually was able to cast down to 1/16 ounce easily with respectable distance. The only negatives are the fact that the reel is heavy and very unrefined, and maybe its long-term durability may be in question since it only costs $20. But other than that, the reel is probably the biggest BFS bargain of all time. The next reel really needs no introduction. It's the 2022 Shimano ALDEBARAN BFS. Now the state-of-the-art ALDEBARAN sports a 29.5 millimeter spool that weighs 5.7 grams. And what can I say about the 22 ALDEBARAN other than it's the best bait finesse reel ever made so far that gives the best bait finesse experience. The ALDEBARAN literally has no weaknesses and does everything at a very high level. It can long cast heavier lures with the best of them, as well as cast easily down to 1 gram. And when you add in the silky smooth retrieve and its ultra light weight, as an overall package, the ALDEBARAN can't be touched. The only cons I feel the ALDEBARAN has is the palm side plate styling is kind of ugly, especially with its cheap looking fully exposed brake dial, and its blue color doesn't really match up with any rods that have any kind of color other than black or silver. Now next up is the KASTKING Krol Elite, a reel that really moved the goalposts for on-paper specs when it first came out. And that's because its spool came in at only 4.5 grams and was 28 millimeters in diameter. And the Krol Elite featured a clone of Shimano's FTB brakes. And add in the fact that the reel came in at under 4.5 ounces in total weight, it looked like the Krol Elite was going to be the king of BFS reels. Now it really didn't turn out to be that way, but the Krol did have excellent build quality for its frame and body. It had good looking components and it was a very comfortable reel to palm. Now it's also a great looking reel in my opinion. As for the brakes, they are very strong, therefore making them very beginner friendly. Now on the flip side, the strong brakes I feel ultimately hindered the casting performance for experienced BFS users. and because of that, the performance didn't match its specs or its high price. The only other con is that the retrieve isn't refined for a reel of its price point, and the drag star action felt cheap. The next reel I acquired was the much anticipated follow-up to the REVO LTX, and that of course is going to be the Garcia Xenon LTX. Now after I finally got the reel, I was very shocked and disappointed to find out that its spool came in at a heavy 10.5 grams, even though it was only 30 millimeters. It seemed like Garcia was going backwards with the Xenon. Now the good things about the Xenon is that, one, it's a ferocious long distance caster of heavier bait finesse lures. It actually beat the mighty ALDEBARAN BFS in a cast battle once. Also, the build quality is good because it is a JDM Abu, and it's a very low profile, comfortable reel to palm. The negatives are that due to its heavy spool, it really struggles with ultra lightweight lures, and the reel that it replaced, the REVO LTX BF8, is actually still a better caster. And also compared to its JDM competition from DAIWA and Shimano, the Xenon isn't as smooth or refined, and there are actually some Chinese BFS reels that are smoother and more refined than the Xenon. So next up is the Dream Tackle Formula D. Now the Formula D isn't a built from the ground up BFS reel. It actually comes with a spare deep spool. Now the shallow spool you see here is about 6.5 grams and is a big 33 millimeters. Now because the Formula D is based on the Okuma Hakai platform, it's very comfortable to palm, and its build quality and tolerances are excellent. And you can see it's got striking looks with its bright silver paint, contrasted by the bright blue machined aluminum components. Also, its bigger spool is deeper than today's ultra shallow spooled bait finesse reels, so you can run plenty of heavier line if you want. The only potential negatives I can think of is that its spool is bigger and heavier by today's standards of bait finesse, therefore its ultra lightweight lure capabilities may or may not be so good, but I will say that I never tested it for ultra lightweight lures, so I could be wrong. Also, the bright blue color components might not be for everyone. So next up is the KASTKING Valiant Eagle 2, a reel that really confused me when I got it because it literally has the exact same specs as the much more expensive Krol Elite. So that means the spool is about 4.6 grams, 28 millimeters in diameter, and the reel also has the same dynamic brake system clone of Shimano's FTB. The size, shape, and weight of the Valiant Eagle 2 is also virtually the same as the Kestrel. The main difference is the frame material, being that the Valiant Eagle 2 is graphite while the Kestrel is magnesium. So because of this, the Valiant Eagle features most of the same pros and cons of the Kestrel. Both reels cast about the same when I cast them side by side, but the Valiant Eagle 2 is less than half the price. So this reel is a great reel for a beginner as its strong brakes are very forgiving and it doesn't cost that much. But the expert BFS user might find it a little underwhelming. Okay, so next up is a gem of a reel, and that is the Hibo Arise Air. Now the Arise Air is one of two BFS reels from Hibo, and the Air is designed for the ultra lightweight lures. So that means its spool is a small 28 millimeters and it weighs only 5.3 grams. Now the Arise Air is not what I would call a budget BFS reel, as it's around $120, but it does back up its price with a lot of desirable features and great looking components. Now the great things about the Arise Air is that it has great build quality with tight tolerances. It's very ergonomic and comfortable to palm. It features a very refined and sophisticated dynamic brake system that is very beginner friendly, but also can be dialed back for the expert user. It casts very smooth, and the retrieve is actually surprisingly smooth as well. And once again, it features a lot of really great looking components. Now, there aren't really any negatives for the Arise Air that are really important. Maybe the unusual asymmetrical shape might turn off some people. It's not quite as small as a lot of its competition. And maybe the cutting edge ultra thin knobs that it comes with stock might not be the best if you are using, I guess, heavier lures. So up next is the 2023 second generation Shimano Conquest BFS. And just like the ALDEBARAN BFS, this reel really needs no introduction, as it has a huge fan base, being the only round BFS reel for a long time. The spool of the Conquest is 29.5 millimeters and weighs about 5.8 grams. So let's start talking about the long list of what's great about the Conquest. Now, it's the smoothest cranking BFS reel out there, just barely beating out the ALDEBARAN in that department due to it feeling a little bit more rigid. But at the same time, it's still got that same ultra smooth, friction-free casting as the ALDEBARAN. Now, the Conquest is a very precise and refined reel in all of its actions, and almost everything clicks. And due to its top-notch build quality combined with its all-metal construction, the Conquest BFS will last a lifetime. Now, the only cons I could think of is that the Conquest is quite a bit heavier than all of the sub 5 ounce reels of today, and because of its extreme quality, the price is quite high. And the only other issue that I feel the Conquest may have is that beginners might find it intimidating to set up. So next is a reel I was really anticipating and very excited to get, and that's the 2023 second generation DAIWA SS Air TW. Now, when it comes to the important specs, this new SS Air TW is the highest amongst DAIWA BFS reels. Its spool is the lightest, coming in at only 5.6 grams, 28 millimeters of course, and it features an all new braking design of DAIWA's MagForce. Now, what I find I like about the reel is that it's very small and very comfortable to palm. And once again, it's got the lightest and allegedly the fastest spool in DAIWA history. And I like the fact that it has a new braking system that no other DAIWA reel has, and I feel it is very friendly for beginners. So now it's time to get to what I didn't like. So despite having such impressive on-paper specs, the casting performance didn't match. Casting it side by side with the much cheaper Alpha's Air, I couldn't really tell a difference in performance. So despite having an all-new brake system that allows such high spool speed, it still feels a bit strong for my taste. And also, my particular reel is not very smooth for how much it costs. And that of course brings us to how expensive this reel is. It is much more expensive than the superior ALDEBARAN BFS, and even more expensive than the equal performing Alpha's Air. Next is the follow-up to the Lingal, and that of course is the Shanghe Lingal 2. Now, this reel is an upgrade in most ways to the original because its spool is much lighter, coming in at only 5 grams and 30 millimeters in diameter. Now, if you watch the unboxing video of this reel, you'll know that it is a lot of reel for the money. It has a very high spec, great looking components, and a lot of extras. One of those extras are ceramic hybrid spool bearings as stock. So when you combine the light spool and brakes that are not too intrusive with those bearings, the Lingal is a devastating long distance caster of heavier BFS lures. This reel also beat the mighty Shimano ALDEBARAN BFS in a cast battle, and did it quite easily, I might add. It also looks great and actually comes in 3 color options. So all this for a reel that is only around $70. So there are not a lot of negatives for the new Lingal, but the few that it has are pretty significant in my opinion. So number one, the ceramic hybrid spool bearings make it a very loud and very buzzy caster. And also the retrieve on my particular reel is not very smooth or refined. When you crank lures in fast, the reel does make a lot of noises. And lastly, the thin metal knobs might not be the best for power bait finesse techniques. So the next reel is one that nobody will ever forget once you see it, and that is the Flight Feather Kingfisher. The spool specs on this reel move the goalposts even farther, coming in at only 3.5 grams and 30 millimeters. In fact, the stock spool on the Kingfisher is lighter than most aftermarket BFS spool upgrades. Now there is a lot to like about the Kingfisher other than its spool. This reel has a JDM level build quality, refinement, and smoothness. In fact, it's smoother and more refined than a lot of the more expensive reels from Japan. It's also very light and comfortable to palm. Also, it's a very quiet and smooth caster. And this reel is actually a steal for what you get if you get it from NACO Shop. Now I'll leave a link in the description to their website if you want to get one of these reels, as well as other reel options that NACO Shop has. Now the only negative is that the toy-like color scheme makes it look somewhat cheap when it's not. Oh, and it does not have a drag clicker, but that's about it. As a follow-up to the original Clamber Hyper Micro, we have the Clamber 2.0 from Fishband. Now just like the Lingal 2, the Clamber 2.0 is a big improvement over the original Clamber in almost every way. The reel got lighter, smaller, and its spool also got much lighter and much smaller, coming in at only 4.5 grams and 30 millimeters. Now there are a lot of positives for the new Clamber 2.0. It has mainstream level build quality, refinement, and feel. The specs are extremely high for its price. The reel is only a little bit over $100, but it's sporting a magnesium frame. It's also a very smooth caster, and it has good brakes that are not intimidating for beginners. And if you didn't know how cheap it was, you would think it's a much more expensive reel than it is. So what are the negatives of the Clamber 2.0? There are none. So next up is the Sinister Flight Feather Cormorant. So think of the Cormorant as a grown-up Kingfisher that has added maturity and extra features. That means the spool of the Cormorant is also class-leading 3.5 grams and 30 millimeters in diameter. So just like the Kingfisher, the Cormorant has JDM levels of build quality, smoothness, and refinement. Casting is ultra smooth, of course, like the Kingfisher, but the Cormorant, as you can see, has a much better paint job that's actually quite sophisticated and shows off just how great the reel looks. Now it has extremely high specs, coming in at under 4.5 ounces in total weight, and that's due to its magnesium frame. It has lots of bearings, and of course it has that class leading spool. But what makes the Cormorant higher than the Kingfisher is the addition of a drag clicker and a higher gear ratio. Now the reel is a bit pricey, but not overpriced for what you're getting. And I'll also leave a link to NACO Shop below, and it'll take you to where you can buy one of these reels if you want. Now the only negative that I can think of is that the Cormorant needs a more sophisticated brake system, as it's using basic MagTrack style fixed brakes that I feel is holding that spool back. And that's pretty much it. Alright, this next reel could potentially be an Aldebaran killer. It's the second Hibo BFS reel, the Arise Elite. Now unlike the Arise Air, this reel is built for long casting according to Hibo. So it has a big spool at 33 millimeters, and I weighed it at 6.18 grams. As you can see, the frame is symmetrical and it's actually made of metal, unlike the carbon framed Arise Air. Now when it comes to things that I like about the Arise Elite, the list is very long. Now firstly, I think it's a great looking reel with a lot of good looking components. The build quality and refinement is at least equal to JDM Abu Garcia, and it has very high specs, highlighted by a very refined, ultra fine tunable dynamic brake system that is proprietary to Hibo. The brake system works extremely well, making it suitable for both beginners and advanced BFS users. Now, with that being said, I've only taken the Arise Elite out just one time, and just from that short casting session, this reel could be the best all-around bait finesse performer. But I will have to do more testing to see if that's true. Now the reel isn't cheap, but so far it's definitely more than worth its price to me. Now the only negative is that the very thin ultra finesse knobs might not be the best for heavier bait finesse techniques. So next up we have the only current BFS reel that has digital braking, the Loni Airlite DBC. And as you can see, this reel is round and it's mimicking the styling of the Conquest BFS. I personally think it's stunning, but unlike the Conquest, the Airlite spool is much bigger and heavier, coming in at 34 millimeters and roughly 9.5 grams. Now, having used this reel quite a few times, there are a lot of things I like about it. It's got JDM levels of build quality, tolerances, refinement, and smoothness. And just like the Conquest, the reel is all metal, but the Airlite is much lighter, coming in at only 5.2 ounces. And it also somehow manages to palm smaller than the already small Conquest 2. The machining of the reel and its components is top notch, and the retrieve is ultra smooth. Now the best thing about the Airlite DBC is its digital brakes that feature the best of both worlds from Shimano and DAIWA. Now the brakes are self-charging like Shimano, but it also has app connectivity like DAIWA, but it gives you much more adjustability. You can even turn off the DC sound if you want. All of this makes the Airlite the funnest reel I've fished in quite a long time. And the brakes actually let the Airlite cast lighter lures much better than I expected, given its spool size and weight. Now it's not a cheap reel, but for what you get, I don't consider it expensive either. Now the only potential negative is that the thin metal knobs might not be ideal for heavier BFS and cold weather. Now next up is an absolute spec monster. That's the High-Star Aurora Air. The Aurora Air is actually at the top of the pyramid when it comes to on-paper specs. The spool is the smallest currently at 27.9 millimeters and only weighs a class-leading 3.5 grams. So you think the Krol Elite is light? The Aurora Air is much lighter at 4 ounces flat. It's also physically the smallest reel I've ever owned. So because of all that, there is a lot to like about the Aurora Air. Now, in addition to what I've already mentioned, this reel also looks great. It's symmetrical with an aggressive shape. Also, this reel is the only reel I can say is a pleasure to palm. It actually feels good in your hand when you palm it. Now, it sports an innovative dynamic brake system that is very beginner friendly. It's a smooth caster that I feel is the best reel I've ever used for ultralight lures so far. More on that in a future video. So what I don't like about the reel is that my reel has sloppy handle tolerances, and I've heard that all of them have the same problem. Also, the reel isn't that refined on the retrieve, and the brakes seem a bit overpowered. So when you combine that with the tiny spool, it absolutely sucks at long distance casting of heavier BFS lures. But despite all that, the reel is a steal at around $70. So if they fix the handle slop, I would buy another one in a heartbeat. So now we are finally at the last reel, the DAIWA Tatula BF70. A real DAIWA made for the US market to combat the popular CURADO BFS from Shimano. Now the Tatula is a bass fishing line from DAIWA, so the spool on the BF70 is big and heavy by today's standards, coming in at 10.8 grams and 30 millimeters in diameter. The pros for the Tatula is that it's very small and comfortable to palm since it shares the same platform as the Alpha's Air. It's also a nice smooth caster with typical DAIWA quality and refinement, and its brakes are very beginner friendly. Now on the flip side, the beginner friendly brakes are too strong for advanced users in my opinion, and because of that there are better casting reels out there for less money. Now since the spool is heavy, it's probably going to struggle with the ultralight stuff, but I'm assuming that based on spool weight that's similar to the Xenon LTX that struggled with ultralight lures, but I have yet to test it. So be on the lookout for a video of this reel casting or attempting to cast ultralight lures sometime in the near future. So to finish up this video, I'm going to give you my recommendations for what reels I think you should buy based on my experience using them. So let's start with budget friendly first. And by budget friendly, I'm talking about reels that are in the $70 range. So for the beginner, I would recommend the KASTKING Valiant Eagle 2 for its strong and forgiving brakes. And for the advanced user, I recommend the Shanghi Lingal 2. Now the loud buzzy casting on the Lingal 2 should be an easy fix by flushing the spool bearings, and despite its low cost, it's a top casting BFS reel capable of embarrassing much more expensive reels in casting distance. So for the mid-price reels that are in the $100 to $150 range, the Clamber 2.0 is probably the best reel when it comes to what you get versus what you pay for. The reel is an absolute steal. Now if you're wanting to get something more exciting that may have a higher performance ceiling, but it costs a lot more, I recommend the Hibo Arise Elite. The Elite checks all my BFS boxes in what I want from a bait finesse reel. Now once again, there's going to be links in the comment section pinned at the top that'll take you to where you can buy both of these reels from Don Kun Fishing. So for the expensive reels, in my opinion, there really is only one choice, and that of course is going to be the mighty 22 Shimano ALDEBARAN BFS. The reel is so good that I've actually purchased 3 so far, and I'm planning to buy a 4th, but they always continually sell out. That's how good the reel is as an overall bait finesse package. So there we go, my bait finesse reel buyer's guide for 2024. I hope this clears up any questions or confusion any of you guys may have due to all the BFS reel options we have right now, and I hope it helps you make an informed buying decision. Alright guys, thanks a lot.